going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Hollywood Already Did It, the final episode for 2021. How exciting. As always, I'm your host, Blake Schultz, and with me is Terrence Tatum.
Hello, everyone.
And we are, of course, your weekly movie podcast for reboots, remakes, sequels, adaptations, and why we keep telling these stories over and over again. And today we are talking about a movie that posits the exact same question in The Matrix Resurrections, the fourth in the live action theatrically released versions of The Matrix. There's, of course, also the Animatrix, the Into the Matrix video game, and the Matrix Online. And one thing I think we really need to address first is I can't think of one other property that had full creative control to its directors. And they were just like, we're going to make a game. We're going to make an online game. We're going to hand that off to some other people, but we're still going to have a hand in it. We're going to make an anime. We're going to make a movie. And all four of those will be like basically in the same year.
Yeah.
Like that is an achievement.
That is an achievement. Yeah. And they were using people while they were shooting one of the films to do the cutscenes for the other. I was like, that's impressive. Well done.
Oh yeah, all I really want is a cut of The Matrix Reloaded with the scenes from Enter the Matrix in
Put
it.
in.
But no, I understand that that's part of a special Blu-ray that was somewhere once, but I want it now, and I want it immediately.
Now. Yes.
But of course, here we are after 20 years, probably one of the most dormant franchises in our sea of reboots, remakes, sequels, adaptations, and spin-offs. One of the few that was left alone. But it's back. What did you think, Terrence?
Yeah, I think Ghostbusters is probably the only other one that kind of had been as dormant as, although we have the 2016 one, so they had a little bit of a cheat code. For this, I dug it. It's surprising me because I did not go in thinking that I was going to like this. I felt like I'm not going to want to see this. And I am mixed on the sequels. I still think Matrix 1 is one of the best things that has ever happened. I think it was both a marvel and an achievement at its time for action films and what it was doing with the way that wire fu and all of that stuff. I thought that was very impressive for its time. The second and third, I like aspects. If I could just kind of take chunks out of each of them and put them together, I think it would be a great film. That highway sequence is phenomenal. So getting to this, I was like, we'll see what we got. 20 years, Keanu Reeves doing the greatest hits of his catalog. I'm into it. And I was shocked how much I kind of dug this weird, this is a really bizarre like hybrid type of a film. It is super meta. It's like I'm winking at you while also being on the other side of the wink and looking at the wink as it's coming to me type of thing. It's very Wes Craven's New Nightmare is what popped in my head immediately, where it's like we're going to step outside of that world and sort of look at it and say, what if this was all like a video, when you said that this was a video game and you designed this and your memories your reality, or has it gone too far? I'm like, oh god, I am not high enough to be where you're trying to take me. But I love it because what it all comes down to, and it's a story about love. And for me, I'm a sucker for love stories, and I know that is what's going to either turn people on or turn people off from this movie, because there's not a great deal of action, and the action that happens is not as stylized or even as well choreographed as the stuff that happens before. The action is more so a byproduct of the story that they're trying to tell, which is the love, and that love story, and Trinity and Neo being the ones, each of them being the one, and sort of being that love conquers all type of story is what this is all about. And I'm a sucker for that, and it works for me. So I dug it when it was all said and done. It does get it's a little too long. There's a smooth 30 minutes of this that could be cut out of this. But all in all, I did enjoy the ride of seeing these characters back together again, and kind of seeing that Neo and Trinity, who were basically the heartbeat of this entire series, back in the saddle, if you will.
Yeah, I agree. I really liked it. There were so many moments where I think out loud, I was just like, oh my, what, wow, whoa. Like there was just so much cool flair that almost all of its flaws I didn't mind. Where every now and then I was like, well, because there was some goofy lines. Every now and then I felt they were trying a little too hard to be like Marvel funny.
Yeah.
And even our new Morpheus, Yaul, I was like, he's playing it a little too cool sometimes. When he's in the loading screen, I was like, you're a little too too much fun in there.
And I wasn't sure the tone when he first came out of the bathroom and he repeated Lawrence's line and did it again and kind of explained it. And I was like, okay, I get where the meta we're going with this, and especially when they started like transposing old scenes on top of it. But I was like, I don't know what tone of humor he's using, because that tone has never existed in any part ever before in this Marvel universe. I mean, in this Matrix universe.
In the Matrix. And that's both good and bad, right? Because on the one hand, I was like, oh, this is so unique to the rest of the Matrix movies, which I feel like when we talk about reboots and remakes and sequels, part of it is like, well, try something new in this franchise. This is where you can play with some new stuff. But there was also a weird disconnect because I wasn't sure if the comedy was just making fun of the old movies, if we're making fun of like our own hooked into nostalgia minds, or if he was just trying so hard to wake up Neo that he was like skipping paces of like, oh, the Matrix cannot be shown, blah,
Blah
blah,
blah.
blah. And I
Yeah.
was like, are we just trying to get through it, or are you trying to do some like Rocket Raccoon stuff?
Yeah, it's like, are you trying to take the piss out of something that is pretty well rare for most people? I was like, I don't know if I appreciate that. And the only reason I kind of went along with it is because the creator of that is still here. It's not like another person outside of this is at the helm. So I was like, all right,
Yeah.
fine.
And
I'll accept that.
it was an interesting way, I think, narratively, of just kind of even being in that meta world of like, this is what we do. Every time you sit down to watch a new Spider-Man movie, he gets bit by the spider. The Wayne's parents keep dying. Every Star Wars movie is the sins of the father. Every James Bond has a Q. Blah, blah, blah. Like there was kind of an underlying subtext of like, you already know this, so does Thomas Anderson, but this is what we have to do. We have to do it. Your brain and your memories and your reality won't allow for anything new until we bathe you in this nostalgic bullshit.
Of this, and it's fascinating that we have two movies this year that do that, like both from Warner Brothers, like both Space Jam and this are like products of this Warner Brothers machine. And that's what their whole
I thought about that a lot,
is.
where I was like, it's interesting that The Matrix Resurrections is basically a thesis paper on why Space Jam 2 is a cosmic waste of time. Like, it's sort of interesting that their like second big blockbuster was being like, this is dumb. But you know, I also always appreciate, like, one thing I think that I said earlier about The Matrix is this is the only time that I can really think of where we have the original creator through all of it and in its return, and you never really get to see. And all the Wachowski movies are very much like this, even when they aren't necessarily as successful in their objective. But most big blockbusters are so formulaic and cookie cutter, and Marvel, DC, Star Wars, Bond, Fast and the Furious, all of these things hit the same beats and explore the same themes and are shot the same way and have the same style. And it's pretty cool that there's this other weird franchise that almost every time they're like, go big or go home.
Let's do something different.
We're going to do, because like the movie crams in so much. We cram in this bizarre game design storyline, this hyper meta awareness. We expand the world of the Matrix, which we'll talk about in a minute. We bring back all of these old characters. We overlay them with new people. We're talking about memories, reality, market research versus like arts. We're still having conversations of gender and sexuality and philosophy, and it all comes back to our binary idea of reality and fiction, and what happens when you let fiction take over your reality. And all of this is in one movie, and when you look at that, you're like, well, of course half the audience is annoyed. They're overstuffed.
It's too much.
Like it's so, and but a part of me is still like, good on you for being like, let's cram it all in.
I feel like a lot of this, I mean, I think this is why sometimes Matrix Revolutions, the second one, like they reloaded. The second one has a bit of a hard time with people because there is a lot that they stuff in there, but they give it, at least in that instance, they gave it an entire film. This feels like the story that the Wachowskis were telling in all three of those movies. Like, are we going to update that and do our own thing with it, and then just shove that into one film? And that's what happens here. And I don't have a problem with it. My brain was able to kind of like ride along with it, but I get how people were just, I'm checking out. Like I'm done. And there are a lot of familiar beats in this. And I think if you don't look at this as being super meta, or if the love story that's a part of it, you can walk away saying this is literally the exact same thing as we've done before. And that's a trap that could happen for people.
And it's very interesting to have this thesis of like all we do is retread stories while you're retreading a story.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there were so many cool other ideas in it, and I think it's a shame that we didn't really get to expand on all of them. And I'm seeing a lot of like, oh, it should have been an HBO Max show, and I kind of disagree with that, because I think by the third episode we would have been like, do we really need a whole hour about the Merovingian and all of this stuff? Like, do we really need 2 episodes of like game designer Thomas Anderson?
Yeah.
I don't. I sort of just like the idea of like, well, the machines, to keep him subservient, put him in this trap where he's making the Matrix, so he now thinks that his memories are fake, and that's how we have him trapped.
Mm-hmm.
We've convinced him that his reality is the Matrix and what he's in is the real world in a very literal sense. And you've given him this backdrop of like, you're psychotic and you have these pills, and then you do get into this weird, like, they've changed your digital self-image so nobody recognizes you, and that's why we couldn't find you, and that's why all of these other people are different. But some of it you didn't get to do all of, right? Like, we spend all this time in the first act talking about Morpheus being half Morpheus, half Agent Smith, but he's all Morpheus through the movie.
Other than the very opening sequence that he comes in with them and they recreate the opening Trinity sequence, he's never really Agent Smith or does anything for the rest of the film Agent Smith-esque.
I was really waiting.
Yeah.
I thought that him and our other Agent Smith eventually were going to be like Mr. Anderson.
Yeah.
It's
a weird cheat that I think there might have been more to it, but it seems like that sort of just got left. And once he's in Morpheus mode full on, then we kind of never go back to the Agent Smith other than him saying, oh yeah, that's what I was.
And then even like you get this giant crew that has these 3 robots or sentients now, which I did like that they were like, this is what they prefer to be called. And I was like, oh, cool. We are doing we've adapted them, and we've adapted them so far that they also have their own words that they don't want to be used.
Yeah.
I thought that was good. But then we introduced this weird twig robot that's in 2 scenes. And a part of me was like, okay, let's just not have that character in the movie. Other
than do a fist bump. I was like, this feels very Michael Bay-esque, where it's kind of like, hey, let's make this little comic relief one that doesn't really serve a purpose other than like, hey, he looks different physically than everything else that we have.
Right. And everything else in the new world, this new IO, we're growing fruit now, we're rebuilding the sky. And I was like, these are all very cool ways of servicing the story we know, but we're not really doing much other than being like, Niobe is more interested in making fruit than freeing minds. And there was never a moment where Niobe was like, yeah, we freed enough minds.
Right, we have enough people to sustain life here. We're done. We don't need to.
And some people want to be in the Matrix. Like, it's still a choice they have. So why wouldn't we invest time in there? It almost felt a little Revenge of the Sith, where you're supposed to see 2 sides of an argument, but they never really let the other side speak.
I think a lot of that is because Niobe is a character that we've cared about previously, and it's just a nostalgia character. They don't let her be either fully bad or fully good. She's sort of in this gray area, and a lot of her decisions go back and forth, and thus don't make a lot of sense when you keep flipping back and forth, back to back. Like the fact that she arrests Neo, and then in the very next sequence is like, yeah, that's cool. They can roll out.
I really thought that's why I thought she was talking about Morpheus when she's like, her partner is like, oh, you're worried. And she's like, I am, but I'm glad he's gone. He scares me. I was like, oh, she's talking about this robot Morpheus.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, she knows not to trust that Morpheus, but we never did anything there.
Right.
Because I kept being like, well, if this is code, which I also like that now we can free code. I was like, that's also cool.
But then it would have led to that at some point in time, I would have assumed that the best way to stop Neo was to probably alter Morpheus's code. Like that would be the easiest way to, I think, to get it.
But then, that kept begging the question of like, well, where is Lawrence Fishburne? because clearly this Morpheus is not our Morpheus and
Right.
never was. It
Yeah.
is just data. It's an agent that they've created, that Neo's literally created.
Because you would think at the very least, now granted, we know that Morpheus is deceased in the Zion IO world, and they have a statue for him. But you would think at the very least that if they are putting a code in, or if he's putting a code in, he would make him look like Lawrence in the Matrix. Like he wouldn't look like Yahya, which is where that becomes a little bit of an issue. I'm like, is it just that you guys didn't want Lawrence or what? I don't know. It just seemed weird that we weren't using him at least in Matrix mode, considering that Trinity and he looks like older versions of himself. I don't see why there wouldn't have been a difference to have him in there as well. If you're putting that code version of Morpheus on the table.
Yeah, it was almost the same way with Smith, where I was like, well, eventually Hugo Weaving's somewhere in here too. But
yeah,
I did like the Agent Smith in here. I thought he did a really good job.
I did too.
I sort of like that we just continued his story of like, well, I'm free and I want to keep being free. So I'm going to kill this Neil Patrick Harris architect analyst character who was also awesome.
Yes.
And then just take over, just like he did in Revolutions, every agent and do another like giant swarm. And even just his line of like, well, you could be anybody, but I am anybody. And you're like, oh,
and then he switches out and it's great.
We've got people jumping out of windows as weapons. And I was like, this is
like they're just becoming bombs. I was like, what is going on? This is fantastic. Yeah. And it was,
and those are the things where I'm like, well, this is worth all the bits that didn't work. These really cool ideas, even not fully fleshed out, are worth having because I've seen the same 12 ideas since I was 14.
Correct. And there are a lot of small philosophy things that they sort of just sprinkle in here that I'm like, that is why you guys are, that's why we're here. That's why this works. That's why the Wachowskis, we trust both of them. Granted, it's only one of the sisters here, but like we trust them. And you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Even at their worst, the stuff that that is the least received, because Cloud Atlas, if you kind of watch it, it's actually solid. And like Sense 8, they always, even though they might shove too much in there, they're always asking questions. And that's
they're always trying to challenge you as a viewer. They're always trying to make you think. And some of the stuff I really enjoyed, partly because it's part of our full-time job, was this weird market research montage of like, well, what do you even think of when you think of the Matrix? And
hands
I was like,
down, and I know this is only something that you and I would love, or the people that are in this, but I was like, I love all of it. I was like, I need to watch this again because that whole sequence was phenomenal.
And I was like, this is what they do. They take original ideas and they talk about how the originality is so important and so impactful. And then they try to regurgitate that.
And they'll filter it down to the smallest or simplest thing that probably is not the heartbeat of it. But they're like, people remember bullet time, so that's what we'll do.
It was such a cool way because, now, and not even now, in 1999, you could talk about The Matrix through the eyes of just a cool action movie, a revolutionary bullet time movie, a trans and sexuality metaphor, a political metaphor, a philosophy of religion, of both Eastern and Western mindsets. You could dissect that from so many different angles. And having this weird scene where they literally are like, what do you think of when you think of the Matrix? It almost felt like it was Lana being like, look how good I was. Look how good we are.
Yeah.
This is what y'all do when I ask it. You can't tell me what the Matrix is. We've now kind of like gone through this whole thing of like, you can only be shown what it is. And in this weird way, this was them being like, they're trying to figure out what this is, and you can only be shown it very literally. Yeah. And that I was like, man, that's awesome. What a cool way. And then you go through it and you get him into the loading screen. And like the next big thing is this idea of reality again, and Morpheus challenging Neo. And it's so much less like last time where it was what you can see, smell, hear, taste, touch. These are just electrical signals interpreted by your brain. It becomes, are your memories even real?
Are they right? Is what you're remembering correct? And then when you put them, I love the whole concept of like memories turn into fiction are they any less real? I was like, oh Jesus, what?
Which is like, I had just seen two old high school friends, and I went on a walk with one of them, and he was like, I can't believe you remember so many things. And I was like, we would have to get everybody we went to high school with and piece together our memories like a puzzle to actually put it all together. And I bet it would still be wrong. And I bet that some people would think one thing and some of us would think the other, and some of us would think that that happened here on this day, but that was actually, and hearing that moment to me was like, yeah, I feel that. That's how we all kind of are. It's why we have to have pictures and
because people have their own interpretations of everything. So yeah, we might both be in there. We may both remember that sequence, but I may interpret it the way that someone said something to me differently than the way that you interpret that person saying something to me. And therefore it's just completely different reality for both folks, which is that it's fascinating to play with.
And then that's like, that's mirrored in such an awesome way when we get to the reveal of Neil Patrick Harris being this analyst, being the successor to the architect. And we do another cool scene where he's moving like the Flash and talking about bullet time and how he figured out, the last guy was all ones and zeros and an equation that must be balanced, and the anomaly is an eventuality that has to be. He's like, and I figured out that I can torture you and make your memories and your mind, and it makes you a better battery. And I was like,
I can put you on this wheel to keep you doing the exact same thing all the time, but it makes you a better worker bee for us.
And you can then look at that through the lens of like, that's social media right now.
Yeah.
Facebook knows that if it shows me the things that are going to upset me and the things that are going to upset you, you and I are going to engage and argue, and we're going to give it more energy. And I was like, it's these kind of things that like make this fourth Matrix, for all of it's like, well, we didn't really explain how Agent Smith worked. We didn't really get into the nitty gritty of this world, and we didn't really understand the agency of this character. And I was like, but they showed us everything going on right now in such a weird, twisted, unique way that I don't really care. Because similar to the first Matrix, my third favorite movie of all time, that movie is about 45% exposition and what is the Matrix and how does it work, before it just becomes, we have to save Morpheus.
Yeah.
And very similarly, this movie is like 80% all of these complicated ideas and sort of catching us up to where the Matrix is, and then being like, well, we got to go get Trinity. And I was like, it's pretty crazy how these super heady ideas boil down to the most like, we gotta go get somebody.
Yeah, we gotta get them.
We gotta go get them.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, they could have just made a really boring thriller where they were like, we found Neo, we unplugged him again, he needs to go get Trinity, and we could have done that in 90 minutes and gone home. And instead we got these weird flying robots and the Merovingian yelling at him in different languages and Agent Smith beating him up and him doing these cool running circles and doing like Dragon Ball Z Hadokens and sitting down with this old Niobe who was just so mad, and Lawrence Fishburne tossing a martini, not Lawrence Fishburne, but Morpheus tossing a martini glass out of a window before doing martial arts. I was like, well, this is a much better way to do that story.
Yeah, if you're going to do a simplistic chase the egg, in this case, chase the Trinity type of thing, then let's pepper it up a little bit and spice it up a bit. And
I don't know what y'all were too mad about, other than maybe you had to take too many high school classes at once. Like
there's a lot of like philosophy and a lot of questioning and all that type thrown at one time. I can see how I see how you get there, and I also see how people probably went in. You can hype something up so much in your brain where you're like, hey, Matrix 1 changed the world, and I want this to do that exact same thing. And you're never going to get that point out of this series when it's going to change the world again. Like, that's just not going to happen. But it can posit enough questions where you're like, I like that we, even 20 plus years later, we are still asking ourselves philosophical questions about what is.
And we're not doing this in an A24 movie or in a super low indie budget movie. This is a Warner Brothers multi-million dollar, Marvel's never going to make a movie that's like, hey, what's gender and sexuality? They're not going to do that.
Right.
Like,
no, that's not happening.
This is, and I'm like, a part of me is just like, yeah, this is the risk you keep asking these studios to take. It's not my fault that it wasn't exactly what you wanted it to be, and it's not my fault that 1999 is gone. That's all. You're on some Ghost of Christmas Past shit. It's not my fault that these things aren't what they were.
Yeah.
It's not my fault. I'm never gonna feel the way I felt after the first Matrix because I'm not 10. It's like,
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, it's the same way. I mean, we talk about this. It's the same way with like the Star Wars franchise. Like that feeling that I got when I first saw the Star Wars or Empire Strikes Back, I'm never going to recreate that. Now there are some that hit me in different ways, but I can't expect any of them to recreate that feeling I felt when I was a child, and I received that because it's going to hit me differently as a child than it does now at 40.
right. So I'm like, so with all of that in mind, I just think it was very successful, and I really liked all the Trinity stuff, the challenge, the sitting down with Neil Patrick Harris, who, by the way, needs to play way more villains now because that man became sinister.
He
So
loves that. You can tell, like he was like, oh, I'm in go mode. Like he was pitch perfect when he's sitting down there and he's just like pontificating and talking about everything. I was like, oh, he's and that you said that flash sequence when he's running around. I was like, oh, he's having a
just
ball.
sitting
Man.
there, fine, we'll let Trinity decide. And he
Yeah.
brings in this fake family, and the kids are hurt and need her to
And
go.
his response was like, oh, it's like that would have worked years ago. Women making decisions now.
Oh yeah, when she just comes back at the end and is just beating him and his jaw's broken and just that's for using kids and there's and a very similar ending to the first one where I think the beauty of the first Matrix was that we could have just not made more. I'm going to show them what you don't want them to see. I'm going to show them a world without you, without borders or boundaries. And then he flies up, and I want to say Beastie Boys plays.
Jun. Yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
And then this one is very similar, where it's like, well, what are you going to do? Make rainbows in the skies? I kind of like that idea. Yeah, that sounds like it could be fun. And then they just fly off, and you're like, yep, they're going to go do whatever now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought they did a good enough job of being like, well, no, there was peace, but some people, but then again, there are just some ideas like Morpheus tosses out and Niobe tosses it out of like, a lot of people think that Neo was working with the machines the whole time. And I was like, yeah, there's just so much here.
The whole like we sort of lean in, talk about it, but we don't get into like how Neo has acolytes now. Like there are fanboys of him that just follow him enough. And the one guy's like, I got questions. Like I got questions too. But we don't really get into how we forget that for a great deal of people, like 60 years have passed in this world, a great deal of those people, he is a god. And we don't deal into that enough other than the people who have already had some type of interaction with him prior.
And they do it with the one kid, right? In the Matrix Reloaded and Revolutions, he brings him the spoon. He said, you'd understand. You set me free. I'm going to join the Nebuchadnezzar. Like, you kind of get the first acolyte. And even that scene where he opens and they're all like, my son is aboard this ship and please guide him and do this and do this and do this. And so, like, that's what kind of been baked into the DNA. I just think the Matrix is a franchise that it's asking you to do a little bit of the work.
Correct.
And sometimes that works. Sometimes with the heady ideas that works. But even like my friend and I sat down after and he was like, well, hold on now. So Smith shoots Neil Patrick Harris and then he has his cool line and then they're attacked by the swarm. But is he on some old Agent Smith stuff where he's controlling the swarm now? Or is the swarm just attacking him leaderless? And if so, where is Smith at the end of this movie? Because he's now just free in the Matrix that apparently Neo can do whatever he wants with. And is there a war? Is there peace? Or was this just a blip in time? And like they set up Santi to be like, I want to go kill this guy because he killed my parents.
Right.
But suddenly Niobe's also like, you're right. And it's like, well, if they're not really at war, why do you? And I was like, no, those are the pieces that needed.
Yeah.
We could have grown a little less fruit and explained that a little bit better.
Yeah.
And those are my only like nitpicks where I'm like, we just chose to build the world a little bit and we added so many people to the crew where like the Nebuchadnezzar was like five people.
And then we wound up wiping a great deal of them off at once. So it became a little bit more like, these are the folks you care about. Whereas this one, there's so many characters in here that I was like, I can't get my
I've got Zeke and Bugs. I don't even know the other one's names.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm done. I'm not learning the rest of these folks.
Yeah, and just none of them are as cool as Cypher. And like you're sort
Right.
of missing some of those
Yeah.
antagonists. Like the first Matrix did a good job of having its core
I
philosophy of what is real, and then having somebody go, I actually think the Matrix is more real than the real world. So kick rocks.
I think that is what's sort of missing in this. Like we know it because we already have the back history. We have seen people who have been on the other side, but this film pretty much all seems pro disconnect from the Matrix. And there's nobody to kind of challenge that question of like, hey, what if we I like it here. I want to stay here outside of the villains, who is just like Smith is like, I'm here. This is my world. You let me off my leash. I can do whatever the hell I want to here. But he's not in he's not in Zion or the real world. So I think that person who's kind of on the other side saying, yeah, I don't want to get unplugged. I like it here. Doesn't exist in this one. And that it seems a little too easy to say like, just unplug everybody, unplug them all.
You almost also posit the question, if there's now peace and now it's more like factions, did them stealing Neo and Trinity just like start a war?
Well,
if they were the most biggest source of power for the machines to survive, did they basically just like steal our food?
Well, that's where I'm sitting, because I don't. We know that taking Neo off of there sort of unleashed Smith and allowed him to be off the leash, if you will. But if Trinity is now off, what does that do for him, and what does that do for the world? You're right. Those robots sort of put them together and put them in place and just held them and hid them. But if they're not there anymore, does Bedlam ensue?
Right. It's like you kind of start getting under the hood of it, which I think just posits like, are we going to get 5, 6 and a show? And because, we do live in this weird world now where you don't really get a movie anymore. You get a movie and the promise of everything else. Like
Right.
Dune came out and they were like, well, you're going to get Dune Part 2 and you're going to get the Dune miniseries with the witches. And the Suicide Squad came out and they're like, well, don't worry, you're going to get the Suicide Squad, but you're also going to get Peacemaker. And then we might also do this. And it's like, I sort of like that this movie is just sort of going, take it for what it is. You might get more, you might not. We'll see you later.
Yeah.
It's kind of refreshing, but it's like it's where I'm getting tired in like the entertainment space where I'm like, everything has just become, we're no longer excited about the thing. We're excited about the prospect of the next thing.
What's next?
It's like I can't enjoy a meal at a restaurant unless I'm looking out the window at another restaurant being built.
But I can't wait to eat over there next week.
Right. Like that's all we're doing now.
Yeah.
And I sort of like that the Matrix is this weird mega blockbuster that's going, no. Because they could have been like, yeah, the Matrix 4 is coming out, and there's going to be an IO show, and there's going to be a Niobe spinoff, and the Merovingian's going to get a prequel series.
I've always been a fan of these big budget, like sci-fi action things that ask so small things. Like Gattaca, most people don't like Gattaca, but I think Gattaca's freaking brilliant. But it's asking these super, super specific questions in this huge sci-fi world. Give me that, because it's something different. One, but it's making me think while also still being gorgeous. And I think it feeds it to me in a different way, where some of those, like you said, those A24 films, while they are still doing some of the same things, they're like, I'm going to beat you over the head with it and peel your eyeballs back so that you watch this, and we will move at this tone the entire film.
Yeah, I was like, it's still cool. And it's like you said, there's not as much action, but there is action. I love it.
Yeah.
You don't have a high, because the first Matrix also was a little action light. It really isn't until that second one where we're fighting in the ballroom lobby and we're on the highway sequence, and you don't have any of that. But I'm also sort of like, yeah, great. Like I really enjoyed it, but I don't know how much more there is to say. I think everybody just has to go see this movie and make up their own damn mind.
I think this is going to be one of those films that's going to be highly divisive, like the other two sequels for Matrix.
Well, you cited New Nightmare when we started. That had the same response that this is, where half the fans were like, this is the nightmare movie to end all nightmare movies. And the other half were like, this is the nightmare movie that ended all the nightmare movies.
Yeah. That is correct.
But it wouldn't be the holidays without a movie that divides a fan base in half. So
that's correct. Star Wars has been holding down the fort for the last couple of years.
they've been taking the brunt of that since like 2016.
Yeah.
So it's nice.
It's nice to someone else to get in there and have some fun. I do feel bad for the Matrix in that they are coming the week after something that is so well received in Spider-Man.
They're not going to make any money at the box office. My theater here in Skokie, Illinois was near empty.
They've been taking. I didn't expect this to happen for Matrix. They've been taking theaters away from Matrix and giving them to Spidey because they've been sharing IMAX theaters, but they're like, hey, you're
Yeah,
not filling this theater, so I'm going to give this back to Spidey because Spidey is still filling those theaters. I was like, oh,
that's so
that's
sad.
unfortunate.
Well, you know, it has been 20 years. People did not like those sequels. It's not like
Yeah.
all three of those movies are beloved by anybody but me. And so like that, I'll just keep scooping up the Matrix with a spoon. I
As
don't
long
think
as they
there's
keep
any
giving me stuff, yeah,
there's just nothing else like this. Blade Runner's not like this. Star Wars isn't like this. Fast Nine and Marvel and DC aren't like this.
yeah.
These are all great movies, and I think you should just go see it, whether it's on HBO Max or in the theater. And I
However you
think
see it,
that's
just watch it.
probably our time,
Yeah,
I would say.
yeah,
So that's it, guys. That was the whole year. We sort of were weekly, which is exciting. We're like half back,
yeah.
as are our viewers. So, you know, leave a podcast under your Christmas tree for some new people. Leave us a review. And of course, share and subscribe. You can do that at Hollywood ADI on Twitter and Instagram. I'm at As Always Blake. Terrence is at Terrence Tatum. And that's where you can find all the other stuff we do across other podcasts, our Marvel pair up. You can't do that anymore. How do you figure? And all of the reaction videos and show reviews that Terrence has on the YouTube channel. And we will see everybody in the new year. So happy holidays and happy new
Happy New
year.
Year.
I guess Morbius is starting 2022 for us, and that
Oh,
sounds,
that sounds
you
terrifying.
know, right. So, you know, keep on rebooting things, I guess. And we'll see you guys later.
Later.